Hello everyone, my name is Stacy Humphreys. I'm the Chief of Interpretation and Resource Management here at the Abraham Lincoln Birthplace National Historical Park, located in beautiful Hodgenville, Kentucky. We're happy to have you with us today. You're joining us today on Saturday, October the 8th, 2022. We are celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the opening of our Knob Creek Tavern. We're all really so excited to have you here with us. You're going to be hearing from a lot of people today. You're going to be hearing from members of the Howard family who were responsible for building this tavern in the early 20th century. You're also going to be hearing from folks from the local community who helped save the farm. And you're also going to be seeing clips from our ceremony and events that took place today. You're going to be seeing people like Grandpa Jones. You're going to see Raptor Rehab folks from here up in the road in Louisville, Kentucky. They have brought their bald eagle with them today. You're going to see some of our living historians, as well as the ribbon cutting ceremony that we did here as part of the events for today. So we hope you enjoy and have a great time.
213 years ago, a young mother had delivered her second child, a son, who she called Abraham. He was born into a new land of freedom. Just 33 years before, the United States had declared its independence from Britain, forming a nation where all were considered equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Who could guess that this little one wrapped in fur on that snowy February morning would grow up to face the national crisis from this unfulfilled promise and the divisive issue of legalized enslavement? As he took the oath of allegiance as the 16th president, Abraham Lincoln was determined to preserve the nation, even as we were plunged into the Civil War and secession. Lincoln continued to struggle with the enslavement issue. By late in 1862, he came to the resolve that ending slavery was expedient for the war effort and provided an opportunity to end a wrong. He once said, "If slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong." On January 1st, 1863, his executive order, the Emancipation Proclamation, went into effect. It is believed that it would be his experiences here at Knob Creek that would provide the future commitment to freedom. Recently, a historian determined by his work that Knob Creek was the beginning of the road to emancipation. I thank all of you for being here today to help us celebrate our first anniversary of the opening of the Knob Creek Tavern. We look forward to the years that we will be here and that those who follow us will be here to welcome generations to this place, and for us to remember our commitment as Americans to freedom. At this point, I ask that Sheila Rice lead us in prayer to start our ceremony.
Please bow your head. Our Heavenly Father, we ask that you continue your blessings upon us and over our families. We pray that you will guide us during our deliberations. Bless and strengthen the sick, needy, and afflicted. We commit ourselves to your care. You are strong tower of defense and protection. Protect us in life's battles that you may be strong and brave. Help us live lives of stainless integrity that reflects honor upon our country. We ask that your good providence protect us from all harm, watch over those who even now guard the gates of freedom. We glorify your great and holy name. Amen.
At this time, the veterans of foreign wars, the Vine Grove Chapter 10281, under the command of Kathy McElroy, will raise our national standard.
Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Order. Forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, just as a reminder, at 11 a.m. under our main tent, we're going to be having our living historian from the Kentucky Humanities, Chautauqua presenter, portraying Grandpa Jones at the main tent. We will also have several ongoing programs starting at 11 throughout the day today, which will include our living history presenters here, as well as the Raptor Rehab of Kentucky. They are bringing the Eagle. We're very excited about that. And then at 11:30 a.m. we'll be Jeff Stanfield, who works here at the park but is in his running clothes today. He'll be leading a fitness hike up to the knobs, up to the overlook. So we have a lot of things going on, so make sure you grab a schedule of events. Thank you.
So folks, we're going to start the ceremony with the posting of the colors. Please rise for the colors.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
That was a lovely job, Vanessa, and a big thank you to Kathy McElroy and the Veterans of Foreign War from Vine Grove chapter. Thank you, Commander. So I want to begin by sharing something that, it's really a favorite quote from of park rangers. And it's from Margaret Mead, cultural anthropologist and writer. And she would say, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." So good afternoon. Again, so happy to see so many folks out on this beautiful day. And we did hold a small event last year when we first opened Knob Creek, but we wanted to come back because we didn't have a chance to actually cut that ribbon. So today we will do so. We are gathered today because there was a small group of people who were committed to save Lincoln's Kentucky boyhood home. This is where Abraham Lincoln's first memories preside, and it will be the foundation on which he will rely on as he faced just tremendous struggles for himself as he led our country through the trauma of the American Civil War. It was 20 years ago when that group decided to dedicate to purchase this farm to save it. Almost 70 years before that, in 1928, a local family had purchased the farm and had built the roadhouse, the Lincoln Tavern, or the Knob Creek Tavern here, to offer hospitality for those seeking to know Lincoln. Their work together ensured that Knob Creek Farm would be saved for today and for generations to come. And so there is a long list of thank yous to the community as a whole for their continued support, for the mayor of Hodgenville, Jim Phelps, to our current judge executive, Blake. Where are you, Blake Durrett? I know he's in the oh, there he is. There he is. To the Howard family, we had several of the Howard family here today. To members of the Lincoln Kentucky Heritage Preservation Alliance. To our Lincoln Museum folks, Rob and Iris LaRue. For the contractors who did such an excellent job taking care of the tavern and bringing her back to life, and to our exhibit contractors and our park staff, park volunteers who are joining us for this special day. And I want to especially recognize former superintendent, who's behind me, Bill Justice, who did a lot of the initial planning work for the Knob Creek Tavern rehabilitation. So I want to first ask Bill to come up and say a few words.
Thanks, Catherine. It's great to be back here in Hodgenville and here at the Lincoln Boyhood Home. And this is honestly the realization of a dream. As Catherine mentioned, there was the committee that came up with the idea of setting this place aside and making it part of the park was so instrumental in creating the future that we see here today. And among those people, and I'm not going to be able to come up with all the names, but the ones that I knew were heavily involved in this were, of course, Iris LaRue, Carl Howell Jr., and Tommy Turner. And there were several others that were involved in this. What is special about that is vision. They had a vision. Iris would tell me this place should be a visitor center. And I have to be honest with you, I came and I looked at this building and I just, but her vision was one that has come true. And that's what Catherine was talking about, a small group of people making a difference. Another person who was engaged in all of this was the former governor, Nunn. He was, Tommy tells me that he was one of the first people who gathered people together and said, we need to save this place. So why? Well, there's some people who would say I use this quote a little bit too much, but I'm naturally anti-slavery. If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. I cannot remember when I did not so think and feel. Abraham Lincoln wrote those words to Albert Hodges in a letter in 1864. There was some debate amongst people here in Kentucky, particularly the landowners and slave owners, about whether what was going on over at Camp Nelson should be going on. What was going on over at Camp Nelson was the recruitment of U.S. colored troops, of African Americans, formerly enslaved people, who to join the U.S. Army. And a lot of people were leaving their enslaved situation and joining the U.S. Army over there at Camp Nelson. Now, I encourage you at some point to read that letter and to learn more about what Lincoln says, because I think in that letter, more than any other, Lincoln captures what he truly believed about this. But when you hear those words, I cannot remember when I did not so think and feel. Think about a young Abraham Lincoln here, planting seeds, planting pumpkin seeds out here in the field, and seeing seeing enslavement around him, not at the level that we saw down in Mississippi, but it was still here. There was going on at the time of his youth a major abolitionist movement here in Kentucky. And the Lincoln family were tied up in that. And they joined an anti-slavery Baptist church. So young Abe saw all of this going on here at the Knob Creek place. And so when you look at where he took the country and what became as a result of the American Civil War, those seeds, just like those pumpkin seeds, those seeds were planted here. I'd argue that there are very few places, there are places in the world, the Park Service manages many of them, where the world changed. This is one of them. So I'm very glad to have been a part of preserving the Knob Creek cabin and the Knob Creek farm, and the efforts that we put into that. But I was just one of several. There were superintendents before me and superintendents after me who managed to carry this project through. But that's why we did it. Because the seeds of the future that we live now were planted then. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well done, Bill. Thank you. I'm so happy he was able to join us today. A recent historian would make the remark that this place is the beginning of the road to emancipation, allowing us to move forward on the realization of the promise of freedom. Next, I'm very honored to introduce someone who's very familiar to those of you who are in the local community and who took great leadership to bring this dream to realization. our former LaRue County Judge Executive, Tommy Turner.
Well, standing up here and looking out at the crowd, I wasn't sure if I was going to speak at an event at Knob Creek or whether I was back in my home church. The Baptist church I attend tends to be sort of like this, where we have several people here, but they all tend to be in the back. So I hope all of you can hear me, and I will try to speak loud so that you can. I also want you to know that on November 19th, 1863, the Gettysburg Address was delivered. At that event there in Gettysburg, the dedication of the cemetery, Edward Everett spoke for over 2 hours. Abraham Lincoln spoke for 3 minutes. And I'm going to be much more like Abraham Lincoln than Edward Everett. I want you to know that. Welcome to each of you on this wonderful, beautiful day. And you know, you can look around the hills and you can see the beauty of this place. And certainly it could only have been faulty land titles and ownership of this property that could have driven the Lincolns from this land. Why else would they leave it? It's such a beautiful place. The journey from possibility to reality, it can often be long. It can be arduous. It can be taxing on our patience. But for all of those involved with saving this property, it was a labor of love. It was a journey from a simple dream to acquire this parcel and expand the Lincoln heritage. Now, we could not be here today without the exhausting effort put forth by countless individuals and agencies to see this dream become a reality, and to all involved. And there were so many, as Catherine said, it would be impossible, and Bill said it would be impossible to name them all. But to all of those, we owe a great debt of gratitude. In June of 1864, Samuel Haycraft of Elizabethtown wrote to then presidential candidate Abraham Lincoln and inquired if he would like to someday visit the place of his nativity. Lincoln's reply to Samuel Haycraft on June 4th of 1860 was indeed he would. In Lincoln's own words, "The place on Knob Creek I remember very well. I was born on No End, very much nearer Hodgen's Mill than the Knob Creek place is. However, my earliest recollection is of the Knob Creek place." Now think of those words. My earliest recollection is of the Knob Creek place. The experiences which helped form the man Abraham Lincoln began on the very ground on which we now stand and sit. If we could roll back the clock 206 years, we could witness a young child playing in these fields, wading in Knob Creek, walking the hills, and watching travelers along a dirt road that crossed in front of this property. We would be watching a young boy whose very existence would change our world. This ground is sacred. It's a sacred piece of earth for the Lincoln legacy. It instilled in his heart a fondness that he never lost. While President Lincoln said of his childhood friend that he knew while living here and whose home was located just up the road, "I'd rather see Austin Gollaher than any man living." Think of that. The President of the United States, and the person they would like to see most on the face of this earth, was somebody who lived here, because that's how much it meant to him. Legend tells us that once Lincoln fell in a swollen Knob Creek and was in danger of being whisked away by the rambling waters. And for any of you that have that live around here and have seen a 3 or 4 inch rain come in the matter of an hour or so, you know what Knob Creek becomes. It becomes a raging river. It becomes something that is very hard to maneuver, especially if you try to wade out into it. Quick thinking on Austin's part, saved and almost drowned Abraham Lincoln. Think about this. That small act of kindness not only saved a life, but it helped to eventually save our nation and change this earth. Today is created from yesterday's dreams, and tomorrow from today's hope. The dreams and hope of Lincoln shall live as long as our glorious United States. Lincoln's story here in Kentucky is one of a young boy with humble beginnings, with little opportunity placed before him, but who contained an undying perseverance. It's a story of hope for every parent, a story of encouragement for every youngster, and a story of promise for future generations. I truly feel the measure of life is greater for the legacy left than simply the life lived. And in America, we strive to live the legacy of Lincoln each day and are committed to his unfinished work. Just as the knobs of this valley tower above us here today, Lincoln towers above all in the hearts of the free, those who desire it, or those that place their very lives in jeopardy to attain it for themselves or others. Yes, we can all agree that Lincoln had very simple, humble beginnings right here, and lived his youth on the very ground on which we are now seated and stand. But the reverence with which we now hold this man is anything but humble. Because when God created Abraham Lincoln, he had to instill in him the surroundings that would shape his very being. The surroundings we now not only see, but can feel. In comparison to today, this Knob Creek farm, and this region for that matter, was for the most part of a wilderness area 210 years ago. Yet it did have one key ingredient. It had a major thoroughfare, a major turnpike running between two growing cities, Louisville and Nashville, and on it the young boy Abraham Lincoln witnessed slavery firsthand, seeing human beings marched to market and families torn and treated as no more than common livestock. And the fact that his family belonged to Little Mount Church, which was located about 3 miles from here, over the knob, the foundation that was instilled in Lincoln that God created all men equal and slavery was wrong, was ingrained in the young, listening mind and soul of Abraham Lincoln, and created the consciousness he would call upon later in life. We can name many who have given a major portion of their life in a quest to better their fellow man. And if at the culmination of their journey they can point to someone and know that person's life is better because of their service, then they've achieved success. But with Abraham Lincoln, his success was not for an individual. It was not even that for a generation. His success was for all of mankind to this day. And there's really, doesn't matter how great or grand we make a celebration of Lincoln's existence, no matter how many monuments we dedicate, no matter how many plaques we install, or other recognition we may have, we can never fully exhibit the tribute and gratitude Lincoln is due from each of us. For without him and what he stood for, and the direction with which that stance steered America, we would not be here today, being able to celebrate our democracy. For most certainly, the government of the people, by the people, and for the people would have perished from this earth. And to think that the ingredients that created the man that was able to do this, those ingredients were created right here on this land. I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky. Words spoken by Lincoln during the dark days of the Civil War's beginnings. Lincoln continued the affection for his birth state and this area, and his life forever revolved around it, its people and its communities. Think of this for a moment. He was born here. He lived his childhood here. His wife was a Kentuckian. His law partner was a Kentuckian. His best friend was a Kentuckian. And throughout his life, This land kept reaching to him, shaping his thoughts, his conscience, and his leadership. To use Lincoln's own words to describe the efforts that have led to this day, it is altogether fitting and proper we should do this, as Lincoln himself was proud to be a Kentuckian. This land, Knob Creek, and the story learned from it will contribute to others, enabling them to capture the American spirit and invigorate thoughts about this great man's living legacy. Many places desire to claim Lincoln as their own. Indiana can stake claim to giving Lincoln strength, the strength garnered by the rough and tumble life on the frontier. Illinois gave him respect. Lincoln most assuredly could not have become president without the respect he gained through his work, service, and political efforts there. But you know, right here, this ground, it gave him life. Life not only in the sense this area is the place of his birth, and this ground is where he spent his childhood, but life in the sense of his character, his values, and those gifts ingrained in young minds and hearts that determine their makeup and their destiny. To use a phrase coined by my good friend and former National Park Service employee Gary Talley, this is the land that molded the man. We truly have the right to call Lincoln our own, and this ground is sacred, claiming that heritage and being able to help better tell the world. To all who cherish the Lincoln story and what it means, and to those that have put forth the effort culminating in this great event and the opportunity to have the Abraham Lincoln Knob Creek Farm part of the National Park Service, we give you our sincere thanks.
So Tommy, thank you for your words that inspire us. And just a big thank you for your public service and Bill for your public service that has brought this dream to fruition. Close enough. And what Lincoln event would be perfect if we didn't have the president himself share a few remarks.
Yes, Lord.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's so good to be back here among the hills and hollows of my youth. And it brings back some memories I'd like to share with you here today. My, how times have changed in America since I was a boy. Those days we had steamboats and horse travel, vast tracts of land out west, just waiting to be settled, and occasional trouble with the Indians. News traveled slowly, by word of mouth mostly, unless you were in the big city. And we looked at the world quite differently back then. Most people thought things like animals, insects, plants, and people had been here on Earth since God put them here a few thousand years ago at most, and they always would be here. We knew what bacteria was, but not much about germs or disease. Country doctors also served as dentists, surgeons, and sometimes veterinarians. Ben Franklin had discovered electricity, though it served no useful purpose. And if you really wanted to know something, there were books, if you could find one to borrow. The year was 1806, and the state of Kentucky was excited with religious revival. At one camp meeting, all were in prayer with head and hearts bowed before God, when suddenly a young man jumped to his feet and began singing. He was dancing with joy. Soon afterward, another young lady jumped to her feet singing, and the two joined hands. Thus, Thomas Lincoln and Nancy Hanks met. And they were married soon and moved into a cabin in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. Well, needing to make a living, my father borrowed money and bought a 300-acre farm about 10 miles south of here, not far from Hodgins Mill and Nolan Creek. Now, it needed a lot of work, but hidden in a pretty clump of bushes and trees was a fine spring, and a one-room log cabin stood nearby just ready to be occupied. Now, it was in that log cabin that I was born, the second of 3 children, on February 12th, 1809. Now, it was hand-hewn, had a dirt floor, a window, and a fireplace. And when I was 2, my father moved our family here to the Knob Creek place. There I spent my early years following my father around as he tended to his crops and farm animals. You know, I barely remember walking behind him as he plowed this field, dropping kernels of corn into the earth and covering them with my shovel. But at least my youth on the Knob Creek farm was anything but dull. Part of the Green River Turnpike connecting Louisville to Nashville passed right here in front of our family's cabin. Back then, there's nothing more than a private dirt road. They called it a turnpike because about every 5 miles or so, a long pole called a pike would be turned down in front of you and you'd pay a tax to pass through. I witnessed an endless stream of pioneers and peddlers, preachers, politicians and judges, overseers and slaves just passing through. Talking to them was about the only way to know what was going on outside my little world. And my curiosity was immense. And when I was 18, a pal and I sat out on a flatboat ride, taking a load of dry goods all the way down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers for sale in New Orleans. That was the first city I'd ever seen. And while walking around, I witnessed a sight that would haunt me the rest of my life. And there were young Negro men being sold by auctioneers from one another to another. Now, growing up, slavery was quite the subject at our family's dinner table. Oh, my pa detested it. So he moved our family away from Kentucky, partly because of it. But what could I do? Only stand and watch. Now, during my lifetime, I'd go on to become a soldier, surveyor, wrestler, lawyer, legislator, and congressman. But most know me best as a wartime president. Well, one of my biggest accomplishments was to issue an Emancipation Proclamation in 1862 that all first people held as slaves in the rebellious states would be then, henceforth, and forever free. I thought that surely if anyone ever remembered me, it would be for this. Some wanted me to take it back later, but I said no. I'm a slow walker, but I never walk backward. Now that next fall in my Gettysburg address, I spoke of equality. 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. I also spoke of a new birth of freedom. But what constitutes the bulwark of that freedom? Well, nothing but the love of liberty, which God has planted in our bosoms. Destroy that spirit, and you have planted the seeds of despotism around your own doors. I believe our founding fathers meant to give all people the chance, and they expected the weak to grow stronger, the ignorant wiser, and all better and happier together. We made the experiment, and the fruit is before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now we're going to move to the front of the the Tavern to cut the ribbon. And Iris, LaRue, and Blake Dirt, if you could please join us.
Okay. 4, 3, 2, 1. Well done! Thank you. So this concludes our ribbon cutting and first anniversary celebration. But One Lane Bridge is going to head back to the stage, so please join them. Our living history folks are going to continue, as well as our Raptors, so please enjoy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Each night I climb the stairs up to my room, and it seems I heard you whisper in the gloom. I miss your picture on the wall and your footstep in the hall, while I'm crying my heart out over you. Those blue eyes now, they smile to someone new. Ever since you've been away, I die a little more each day, while I'm crying my heart out over you. Tonight I've said my heart is weary, but I'm wondering if I'm rolling red to dream about you, don't you let me. I wonder where you are tonight. Upon my window pane tonight, and though your love grows even colder, I wonder where you are tonight. You broke my heart, you never loved me. Someone who knows the love I'm sharing. The rain is cold and slowly falling upon my window pane tonight. And though your love grows even colder, well, I wonder where you are tonight. That's what you're feeling right there.
I'm Janice Howard Vitito. My grandmother and grandfather were Chester and Hattie Howard. They are the ones who built this place and lived across the road and bought this property. My grandmother was crazy about Abraham Lincoln. She talked Papaw in, I call them Papaw and Mamaw. She talked Papaw into buying this place, and they moved from Howardstown down here. And my father was Paul Howell Howard. He went to school at Howardstown, where they lived when he was young, and bootlegging was so bad up there that when he got in the 8th grade, my grandmother had a sister lives in Kansas City, and so she sent him out to Kansas to a Jesuit school out there called St. Mary's. So he packed up and left out of the 8th grade, and he just came home on the summer holidays. After he came back, he went to UK, and he went 4 years at UK, and then he graduated with a business degree. And he came back home, and it was the middle of the Depression, and there was no jobs to get. So my grandfather and my father decided to build this tavern. And they cut the logs off the hills out here and had workers around that didn't have jobs during the Depression that built this place. And my father designed it from something he had seen out in St. Mary's, Kansas. So he ran it for about 3 or 4 years, and he had big bands come in from all over the country. That was been during the big band era. We'd catch them in between their gigs. He'd have them play here, and there were people come from everywhere. It was just packed. And of course, it was a honky-tonk, like they sold alcohol. There was lots of fights, and so my daddy got blackjacked in the head, and my grandfather said, "You're going to get killed out here. You're getting out of here." So then they went to New Haven and built a general store in 1935. And my father ran that, and his father together, and then later my father, I went to work with him, and then later he sold me a partnership with him, and then after he died, I bought the place. And I ran it for a few years after that, and then when my husband retired, I retired with him and sold the store. I used to come out here when I was a kid all the time and stay with my grandmother, and she used to make us pinafores out of feed sacks, and I thought they were the cutest things there was. She had an old pedal sewing machine, and she let us go upstairs and play on that sewing machine and sew things up. Of course, she had chickens and guineas and ducks. It was just, we shelled corn in the barn out there and went to feed, and then we stayed in the creek catching minnows and crawdads, and used to climb in here and go fishing in a pond up there, and she'd take a meat string and take a straight pin and make a hook out of it. And of course, there was no barb on the hook, and you couldn't hardly catch a fish with one of them. It would get off all the time. But anyway, we went up there and played. And then she had a big dinner bell, and she'd ring that bell, and we'd all run. When it rang, you knew it was time to come home for supper. So I don't know anything. I worked out here once or twice for Fred when he ran it, my father's brother. He was short on help one day. I guess the colored man he had working for him, Manuel, couldn't come in or something, or was sick. So anyway, he asked me if I'd stay in the cabin out there when the tourists came through. I was out there in the tavern, and I didn't know a thing about Lincoln. I was too little. I didn't know anything. So people would ask me questions, and I'd just make up all kinds of answers, and they would laugh, you know. So anyway, that's all I can tell you about. I guess that's about it. This was a magical place when I was a kid. I liked to come over here. And Christmas, my grandmother would always bring me over here, and they had pottery and stuff. She'd give me a plate or something of pottery that Louisville Pottery had made. They used to sell Louisville pottery here. Well, Abraham Lincoln means to me that my grandmother worshiped him. She talked about him all the time. One time she even wrote a little book about him. I don't know what happened to the little book, but I remember seeing it. It wasn't very big, and she had a drawing on the front that she had made. My grandmother thought Lincoln hung the moon. Well, it's just where Abraham Lincoln spent his younger years, and his brother is buried up on the hill over here, not very far. I've been up to his grave. He had a lot of fond memories, I'm sure, but a lot of sad ones, because this was his father lost the place. He didn't have the lawyer to draw up his papers, and he didn't have it done right, and he lost it and had to move on, which was sad. But like I say, my grandmother she just loved him.
Well, my name's Milburn Howard. I'm one of the hireds that used to own this place. My grandmother bought the farm in 1928. I've been out here all my life. I'm 76 years old, so. Yeah, I remember, coming out here when I was a wee lad, swimming in the creek and looking for minnows and all kinds of stuff, snakes. I used to hunt out here all the time. I worked out here in the gift shop, maintained the property for 15 years, mudded the cabin. We took care of inside here. We took care of the floors. We took care of all the maintenance. We mowed all the grass. Took care of the fields, mowed the fields. Just everything that needed to be done. Made improvements. My uncle that owned the place before we did, he made a lot of wine. He lived in Hodgeville. He had a little 12-gallon still that he made brandy with. So we used to, during deer camp, when the place was closed down, he'd bring it out here and we'd take it down in the basement and we'd make whiskey. Everybody get all drunked up, carry on. It was a lot of fun. But we did all kinds of stuff out here. Had a cousin, that first cousin of mine, Fabe, which was Fred's son, he lived out here upstairs until the National Park took it over. Had a good time out here. Hunted, had a pond up on top of the hill, we'd fish. Go up there and sit at the picnic table. That's up at the, what they call the lookout now. We made that up there. I had an old bulldozer at one time. We had a picnic table up there. We could sit up there and look out the whole hollow. We could look all the way to almost New Haven. Me and my son Russell, we opened up on Sunday morning. We'd come out here and open up, and we had tourists come in. We'd talk. Had a log, a ledger in there that everybody signed. And I remember one time I went out to the cabin and walked around the cabin, and there was a big video camera sitting there on the ground. There wasn't anybody around, so I picked it up and brought it in, and about an hour later, somebody called, wanted to know if we found a video camera out here. And I said, yeah, I've got it in here. They were in West Virginia. And they turned around and came back and got it. It's all kinds of people from everywhere. You just couldn't keep track of everybody. There's people from Europe, France, England, Japan, a lot of them from Japan. They like Lincoln. I made a movie out here one time that I was in. It was, me and my two sisters were in it, and it was called Abraham and Mary Lincoln, A House Divided. And it was a documentary, pretty long movie. Also, a production company out of Nashville, Tennessee come up here. Oh, a Lincoln presenter. Yeah. I was always too short for that. I got the pictures of it, but here I am, 5'7", and there he was 6'4", so it didn't work too good. If I got a shot of my head, it was all right, but a whole body shot didn't work too good. But yeah, my sisters are the ones that got me into that. They got the outfit and made me a Lincoln presenter. Well, I still come out here every once in a while. I'll meet somebody and introduce myself and, tell them that my grandfather built this building. He paid his laborers, it was during the Depression, he paid them, said 75 cents a day to cut these logs and peel them and everything. And at the time, I think he said it was gypsy or Jimson plaster or something is what they put in the walls to seal it. All the logs were cut off the farm here. It took him a couple of years to build it, I think. The first thing that comes to my mind is he preserved the Union. If he hadn't have won the Civil War, then it's no telling what we would be right now. I mean, it would be two countries in one continent. So I think that Abraham Lincoln saved the Union. He came from here, nothing, and to the president, which was a great feat in itself. And I've walked in these tracks many a time out here. Well, you think about it. You think about the history of the place. You know, a lot of people don't think about it like that. You know, local people here, you know, it's always been here. They don't, just like anything else, they don't really think a whole lot about it because it's something that's always been here. But my grandmother, you know, she was a big Lincoln fanatic. If she wasn't, then we wouldn't have owned this place. You know, you think about it, you put your foot down, and the President of the United States stepped there. My grandmother always wanted this place to belong to the national park, and we kept it as pure as we could. You know, we didn't let people build taco stands or, you know, anything anywhere around here close. We owned land on both sides of the road. We didn't let anybody build stuff that would take away the view of this place. So when the Park Service got it, it was just the way my grandmother bought it. Oh, and the first building that was built here was the little cabin out here. My grandmother built it first. So, and then this building was second.
Yeah, all the Rangers are talking to each other over them. Oh yeah? Did you talk to friends or your family on the walkie-talkie?
My name is Carrie Howard Boone. My family used to own Abraham Lincoln's Boyhood home when I was a kid. My first job was out here. I started in the 90s. I was 13 when I started working out here. I was a tour guide, and I can't say that I did a lot of work. We used to have the fireplace. There was a big moose head back here, and there was a glider, and I would come back and sleep in front of the fire while I was supposed to be working. But if somebody came for a tour, I hopped up and went out to the cabin and gave them a little spiel, which I remember some of, but not a whole lot. Most of my memories out here are playing in the creeks, hiking back to the waterfall, running around with my friends. I was talking to my friend out there earlier. She lived in the house right up the street my great-grandparents owned. Me and my cousin would come out here and we'd holler at her and her brother, and we'd go play in the creeks. And I remember the Boy Scouts being out here a lot. That was always fun when I was a kid. The inside of this place looks so different. It's nice, but I miss the old place. We had all this stuff hanging on the walls, artifacts and different things, and there was a big old bar. As soon as you walk in the door, this big long bar, we kept all our inventory back there. And upstairs, and my dad's cousin, Fabian Howard, he lived upstairs in this place. He kind of watched over it, and he had this black cat, Trouble, who was mean, and you'd go up there to get stock. You'd go up there to get flyers and flags or whatever to bring down here to store in the gift shop, and you'd have to watch out for Trouble because he would reach out and grab you. It was great living out here and roaming these hollers and hills, and it was sad when they sold it, but I understand, you know, they were getting older, and my cousins, my brother and myself, we all went to college, and, you know, when they wanted to sell it, with my brother, we were talking out there earlier, there was this billionaire from Texas who wanted to buy the place, but my dad and his brothers and sisters, they were afraid of what would happen to the place, you know, after he passed, so the government was a better option, and they ended up selling it to this group called Friends of Abraham Lincoln, and they collected the money for the place, and then it finally went to the National Park Service, and they have more resources, and they've done a wonderful job, but It was hard to see it empty for so long, I'll tell you that. For years, this part, they had opened the cabin, which was nice, but the gift shop had stayed closed for a long time, but it wasn't up to code. We knew that. So the tavern used to be, we always call it the Tavern. It's Lincoln Boyhood Home, the gift shop, but we always called it a tavern because when my great-grandmother bought this place, her brother owned the Birthplace. And so she wanted a place of her own, Hattie Howell. I'm named after her. She was Hattie, Virginia, and my middle name is Virginia, but she wanted a place of her own. So they rebuilt the cabin from logs from the Austin Gollaher home. He was Abraham's best friend when he lived here. And then this place was a dance hall. They wore out 2 wooden floors from what I hear dancing. My papaw, Bougie Howard, Francis Milburn Howard Sr., everybody called him Bougie. Him and my mama were Bougie and Diddy. They used to come out here dancing when they were dating, and they used to do this dance called the apple shine. You'd get out in the middle and you'd shine. If I could have seen that, that would have been nice. I remember one time my papa used to have minnow traps out in the creek out there. I was always in the creek, and I happened to cross this minnow trap, and I thought, well, somebody's catching all our fish. So I got in there and finagled with it, and I let them all go. And then my papa found out, and he was mad. He was really mad. So I took off running and hid in a cabinet back there in the back. There was our kitchen. We used to have weddings out here. A lot of people got married out here. There was a big pavilion that's no longer out there that my dad and his cousins built, but they always used the kitchen for the weddings, and my papa was running after me, so I had to hide in the cabinet in the kitchen. If I were to meet a stranger, what I would want them to know about this place, my family loved this place. They wanted to take care of it, and they did for years. And since they bought it when I was a kid, Abraham Lincoln was always something we talked about. I don't know a lot about the other presidents, but I know a lot about Abraham Lincoln. February 12th, 1809, that's his birthday. And, he moved here when he was 2. His sister Sarah was 4. His baby brother was born here and died here and buried up the road. And it's just, Abraham Lincoln has always been something that our family seems to have a lot of history with. It was a labor of love. They used to have to remud the cabin every year, and they all came together to do that. You have to chink it with the wood. And like if you go out there now and you can see where some of the red clay has come away, but my family would always get together every year, and they enjoyed doing it. It was just something they bonded over, and they all love this place. Yeah, and they're all very, very happy with how it's turned out, and that it's, it didn't just sit empty forever, and that it's been restored, and just they all loved it, and I loved it. I come out here and it reminds me of being a kid, walking in the creeks, and it'll always have a special place in my heart coming out here, and I hope that others enjoy it. It's peaceful, it's quiet, it's beautiful out here. I can see, when Abraham, his earliest recollection was of the Knob Creek place, and it made a big impact on him. And, it's one of my earliest memories too, is running out here playing. It made a significant impact on Abraham Lincoln. The road up there, he would see the slaves being brought up and down the road, and that made a big difference to him in how he acted politically later on. What Abraham Lincoln means to me is freedom. He did the right thing, and as a young child he saw that it was wrong, and that impacted him. In closing, I would like to say that this place holds a lot of fantastic memories. It's a beautiful place to come visit. Abraham Lincoln's history is interesting. And that's it.
Indent. That gives me a little bit of material to work with. I can come in here like this, like that, like that.
like?
Well, I don't know, obviously. Maybe obviously to you.
So you put this down next to the coals and you toast one side.
My name is Russell Howard. I'm one of the Howard family. My great-grandmother Hattie Howell was, and her husband were the ones that bought this farm and originally got it set up as the tourist location that it became. It was kept in the family till the early 2000s, and then we sold it to the government at that point. I remember being here during high school. I grew up around here. When we moved back to New Haven, I was a tour guide and worked at the gift shop here for most of my high school time. I spent a lot of time out at the cabin. I always had a book in hand reading as I waited for the next people to come out, where I would give my spiel about the cabin. It would be something like, this is a reproduction of the log cabin that was here when Abraham Lincoln was 2 to 8 years old. The original cabin itself was torn down in the 1870s when my great-grandparents built the place. They had the man who tore it down, he was in his 90s at his time, help rebuild the cabin that's on the site as close as he could remember to the original cabin's look. And they took logs from the Austin Gollaher home, who was a friend of Lincoln who saved Lincoln from drowning in Knob Creek one time when they were young kids. Abraham Lincoln, he wrote that his earliest memories were of the Knob Creek place, and this is where, as they said, he saw the slaves heading south because this was a main thoroughfare at the time. Other stuff, it would be family get-togethers out here. We would have big events during like the Lincoln Days in collaboration with Hodgenville. The building, the family calls it the Tavern because it was originally a dance hall and tavern when it was built. They actually supposedly had to replace the wooden floor in here twice because they danced holes in it. It went over to become a gift shop and tourist stop in the 50s when LaRue County went dry at that time. It was Sunday morning before we opened up. It was always cooking the country ham in the kitchen in the back, red-eye gravy there, and enjoying that, having a nice meal before getting started for the day. If I were to meet someone from out of state, say, what I'd want them to know about the place is that the family loves the place, loved it, and we wanted to give it to the government over, there were some other groups looking to get it from us when we sold it, and we thought long term, this is what great-grandmother Hattie would want. She said she wanted it to eventually go to the government because they would be the ones that would be able to maintain it and keep it up as it is the longest without changing it. Abraham Lincoln means to me someone who was willing to stand up for what he thought was right. Even though it was something that put a heck of a lot of pressure on him and a lot of stress and so on, he did what he thought was right in the long run, no matter what the cost.
Showing off your wings, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
8 miles an hour, baby, we're coming through my view. 8 miles in the sun road, and have more to do. I said one day I'd come back, said it from the start. 8 miles an hour, he'll hold me apart.
It's an absolutely beautiful fall day at Knob Creek today, and it's been a pleasure to be here for the official ribbon cutting today. I have the ribbon with me. I also have at the Lincoln Museum, where I'm employed, one of the shovels that was used for the groundbreaking several years ago, along with a program from that event. So this ribbon will join that shovel and be part of a hopefully lifetime worth of viewers seeing and understanding the story of Knob Creek and the community and its efforts to save Knob Creek for the National Park Service. Long before I ever started at the museum, I had my first place of employment here at Knob Creek. At that time, the facilities were owned by Fred and Mary Brooks Howard. They ran it as a souvenir gift shop, roadside stop, as well as the Lincoln Cabin and all of the history that went with not only the Lincoln family, but with the Howard family. The Howards for many, many years took great care of the grounds here at Knob Creek, keeping the land as pristine as it was probably when Lincoln was a little boy. So from my first job here, I can remember hundreds, thousands of people coming to visit throughout the year. I can remember the seasons changing here, the big fireplace in the visitor center. Wildlife is abundant in this area, everything from little creepy crawlies to all sorts of bats and birds. Just a beautiful, beautiful area. And I think the history of the place is perhaps somewhat more in-depth, if you will, than the history that we have at Lincoln Birthplace National Park. In that, Lincoln spent his formative years, the ages 2 until he was almost 8, here at this Knob Creek farm. His earliest memories were of this place. His first real friendships were developed here. He attended his first school from this place. The people that he saw traveling north and south on the main highway here between Louisville and Nashville. And of course, he also saw slaves being taken south to be sold into slavery. All of these many, many things and many people left deep impressions upon a young boy who would never forget those early connections. In fact, when he was president, he said, one of the people that I would most like to see is Austin Gollaher. Austin having been Abe's childhood friend right here at Knob Creek. So I think we can walk around this farm, walk these grounds, and imagine 206 years ago what it would have been like. It still looks very much like that today, and I think our community and all of those who worked so hard to make this place part of the National Park Service should be commended for everything that they've done, including the Howard family for preserving it until such time that it could be taken by the Park Service and hopefully will rest there for the next centuries to come for people to enjoy. When I worked here, the cellar hated to go down there. That's where the extra inventory was kept. This whole knob area is known for snakes, and I was always petrified to go to the cellar to get a new box of whatever was needed. Usually Mary Brooks Howard, she would go herself and get it and bring it upstairs. One day I was behind the counter. She had gone to the basement to get something, and as I went around behind the counter, here is this humongous, it was about a 6-foot long copperhead behind the counter. That, I think, was my worst experience, okay? That one I will never forget. I also remember the year that the facility was actually going to be closed. It was between the transfer period from the Howards to the National Park Service, and community leaders did not think it would be a good idea to keep it closed. So we at the Lincoln Museum kept the building properties open that summer for visitors, just because we felt like that was a necessity, that it stay open as much as possible. Lots of good times, lots of families who had their reunions here, lots of young people from Nelson County in getting their driver permits would drive from New Haven, Howardstown, surrounding communities. You would drive to the Tavern, practice your parking skills, and then drive back home. Lots of good memories, lots of fun, picnics on the grounds, school tours here, just a good time. Great place to work. It's very humbling as the exhibits came together here with the new renovations with the Park Service. Park personnel asked if we would consider making some statements about our commitment to seeing Knob Creek become part of the Park Service, and if they could do photographs. Of course, we all agreed, whatever to be helpful, you know. And then the next thing you know, your picture and your comments are part of the permanent exhibits at a national park. It's humbling, and I was very pleased to do it, though. Things move slowly sometimes, and this project certainly moved very slow. It was an expensive project to redo everything the way it has been done, the way it should be done. It's beautiful. The exhibits portraying the changes in the seasons here in the valley and the knobs, but also the changing seasons in Lincoln's life. I think it's a great inspiration to people. Saw a poll recently, just last week. Do you think Lincoln was the greatest president we've ever had? 16% said yes. 67% said probably. And I think the other was like another 17% were all divided between several different presidents. So this is an American populace voting for greatest president. The visitors that we see at the museum, the visitors they see at the Birthplace and here at Knob Creek are international. And they all have one thing in common. They are enamored of Lincoln. They study Lincoln. They admire Lincoln. And here we are right in the midst of the man whose life made such a difference for so many people. It's unreal sometimes when you stop and think about it. So it was a great honor to be part of all the things that have happened at Knob Creek, from my teenage employment years to my older years now, and having met so many wonderful people who have worked so hard to make this happen. The primary thing guests here to Knob Creek should take away with them is that this place looks and feels almost exactly as it did when Lincoln was a child, and he stood right out front here in front of the small reproduction cabin, looking at the road, which still runs exactly as it did when he was a boy, and watched the world go by his door, knowing that he wanted to be more than just a little country boy. I think he already knew in his heart that he wanted to do something more with his life. And if he could help people, be they white, black, pink, yellow, it was just a desire to help people and to believe in equality for everybody. Abraham Lincoln means to me kindness, common sense, humanity. I would truly like to have a conversation with the man. I think he was very humorous. His rapport with people is evident. Even with his enemies, he had a rapport. His understanding, his Christianity, just so many different things about Lincoln that appeal to me, I think appeal to a lot of people. I'll take my ribbon and go put it on my little shovel, okay?
Moving the coals over to a separate area, and the cast iron pot is going on top of the coals. I didn't need to do it for the sausage and apples, but if I was baking something or roasting something that's going to take a long time to cook, I would have put the lid on top and put coals right on top of that lid.
What type of owl is that? So she is a great horned owl. They're the largest owl species that we have here in Kentucky. They are known as crepuscular hunters, which means they like to hunt at dawn and dusk, not middle of the night. Any owls that you see here in Kentucky that have yellow eyes like to hunt in the lowlands.
Hello, my name is Stacy Humphreys. I'm the Chief of Interpretation and Resource Management here at the Abraham Lincoln Birthplace National Historical Park. And I was hired here at this park in my role in September of 2012. So I've been here just a little over 10 years. So about half of my Park Service career thus far has been spent at this park. And it's really very special to me because, as I always tell people, you know, we always talk about Lincoln and the wonderful things that he did during his life, his presidency, but this is the only spot in the entire planet that can say he was born here. This is the spot where that baby and was born, and that small child grew up, and all those formative experiences he had. One of my favorite quotes that speaks to this is by Aristotle. He said, "Give me a child until he is 7 and I will show you the man." And I think that is perfect for Lincoln, because he spent the first 7 years of his life here in Kentucky between the Knob Creek farm here and also the Sinking Spring farm. And that, you know, you can see so many evidences in his life. Those seeds were planted here. His love of reading, education, his stance on slavery. He always said, if slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. And I'm naturally anti-slavery. I cannot remember when a time I did not so think and feel. That was all part of his upbringing here in Kentucky. And that makes this place very, very special. For the tavern here at Knob Creek, I always joke and say this project has kind of been like my baby for the last 10 years, and I've only been part of it for 10 years. There has been bigger efforts, a lot more other people that have been involved that you've heard from as part of this video, but I've just had this small piece of it, and I'm honored to have been part of this project. But I helped the first phase get underway, which happened around the 2014 time period, and that is when the parking lot was expanded out front of the tavern, and that's also where we got the new restrooms. I'm a trained historian, but I know more now about lateral fields and septic systems than I ever want to know. You know, the things you pick up on your job, who knew? That went in, all those things went in 2014. Then there was a lull period. We didn't know if we were going to get the funding to finish the project, basically to rehab the building. Spent a lot of sleepless nights tossing and turning over worrying if we were going to get the funding, but finally we did get word about 2018-19 that we were going to rehabilitate the tavern and bring it back to its glory and allow visitors to come back inside. It was right before the pandemic. We started work on the rehabilitation of the tavern. I do remember there was a lot of concern over the soundness of this structure. I always said the Howards do a great job, but they were not structural engineers. So they did not put things inside the building for its longevity, for a long life, which, you know, is understandable. So the first thing they did when they rehabbed the building was put iron rods through the structure. So that way it holds up the first floor from collapsing into the basement and keeps the top floor from collapsing into the first floor where we are currently located, where all the exhibits are. So that was the very first thing. They made it sound, and then they started work on the building. 100% of the chinking, which is the material in between the logs, were replaced on the outside. About 40% of the logs on the exterior had to either be replaced or firmed up in some way. And then about 70-75% of the chinking in between the logs on the inside of the tavern was replaced. We did leave original material whenever we could. I always remind visitors the hearth that you see at the one end of the building with the chimney, that is all original. The floors are all original, and I always say if these floors could talk, what stories they'd tell. I also know every window was restored. These are the original windows when you come see us at the tavern. The contractor, they removed the windows, they scraped the paint off, they restored it, they took all the panes of glass out each, you know, carefully, gingerly, restored each window, repainted it, did not use lead paint because they had lead paint around in the 20s and 30s when the building was originally built. And then they set each window back in its original location. And there are 32 windows in this building. I know because I had to count one day. So, you know, things you know that you would never think you knew. But, and then I was very involved with the formation and creation of the exhibits, the interpretive exhibits when you come into the visitor center. We did start that process in January of 2016, and the exhibits were installed in the tavern in August of 2021, so last summer. And so we worked with a contractor on, they came and met with us, they met with members of the community, basically saying, what stories do you want to bring to the front? So we wanted, of course, to talk about the Lincoln family, Lincoln, young Abraham, his experience on the Kentucky frontier, what that would have been like, what that would have been like living in a log cabin, who they would have seen pass down the road in front of their house, what was the community like, you know, him going to school, going down the road and attending a blab school with his sister, you know, all these experiences that were part of his early formative years we wanted to try to capture in our exhibits. There's one small detail that we incorporated that not many people, I don't think, pick up on, but I always love to share with visitors. We have 4 main sections of our exhibits as you go through the tavern, and each section is color-coded either with colors or photographs denoting each season. So when you come into the exhibits and go to your left, you'll start in spring and you'll see Knob Creek in bloom with flowers blooming and the dogwood trees blooming. Then you'll move through to the second section of exhibits, which is summer. And then finally the third section is fall. So there you'll see the leaves turning. And then the last section that talks about Lincoln's life and legacy, that's winter themes. You'll see a lot of snow-covered themes, cooler tones. And we wanted to do that as a nod to the frontier life. The frontier farmers, just like the Lincoln family, their lives would have been dictated by the seasons. So we wanted to give that as a nod, kind of a subtle nod to the seasons. Those are some really cool things that the story talks about, not only the Lincoln family, but it also goes into the legacy of Abraham Lincoln. It talks about the importance of education to him, along with where he got some of his inspiration for some of his speeches, as well as the Howard family building the tavern and the community banding together and saving this farm and buying it from the Howard family and then giving it to the National Park Service, basically giving it back to the American people so that generations for all time now can come and see this spot. So it's a very special place. I love it here. It's kind of a juxtaposition between the Birthplace unit where we have the memorial and it's such a formal landscape. Here you can still see very much the farm that Lincoln the boy lived on and played in the creek, and I mean you can still see shadows of that, and I am just so honored to work here, and just it's a lot of fun to meet people from around the world that come here because of Abraham Lincoln. When I meet a visitor from the United States, down the road here in Kentucky, or from Pennsylvania, or from one of our visitors from around the world, I always encourage them to come out and walk the ground. When they're at the Birthplace, I encourage them to go see the Memorial Building, which is the first national monument to Lincoln in our country. It actually predates the Lincoln Memorial in DC by about 11 years, and a lot of people are surprised at that. But I also encourage them to come out here to Knob Creek and to walk these fields and just, you know, not only commune with nature, but commune with history. You can feel it. It's very palatable out here. Just seeing the grounds and walking on that same ground, and out here at night, it's beautiful because when you look up at the night sky, it's still very dark. You can see the Milky Way, and I always stand and think, you know, some of these are the same stars that Lincoln and his family would have seen when they were here. So that's what I always try to encourage people to actually go out and walk the grounds and see what Lincoln saw. I think that's very important. What does Lincoln mean to me? That is a very complicated question. He means so much. I mean, I always joke and say he's always been part of my life, which I know sounds weird, but I've been a history geek my entire life. My parents are history geeks. I'm a product of history geek. So they took me to my first Civil War battlefield when I was 4 years old. And I grew up going to battlefields. And my dad is a firm believer to understand the tactics. You have to walk the battlefields. So I grew up walking a lot. My mom is a photographer, so she captured images that like forever seared into my memory because, you know, this is my childhood when I look at some of these images. And I grew up going to Gettysburg a lot, and of course, what better place to talk about Lincoln than him delivering his immortal address there. And I've had the great honor of working at Gettysburg in my career and just leading people through the National Cemetery there and remembering Lincoln's words, it's just been just such an honor. And it just, again, it's like here, it just seems so real to me. Every park that I've worked at as part of my National Park Service career has been connected some way to Abraham Lincoln. At Gettysburg, of course, with him coming to deliver his address, and I worked on the National Mall, so I got to work at the DC Lincoln Memorial, and at Ford's Theater a couple times, and then I went to the Arch in St. Louis, which people are like, how do you connect that to Lincoln? And it's like, well, he was a huge supporter of westward migration. He signed the Homestead Act in 1862. So there's that connection. And then, of course, coming here to his birthplace in Kentucky, you know, what better place to talk about, you know, the child that would become the man. So it's a very multifaceted question, but I feel he's always been a part of my life. It has truly been an honor and a privilege to be part of this park, to carry on the Lincoln story every day as part of my job, as part of the National Park Service. It's been such an incredible honor and a blessing to be part of this project of the rehabilitation of the Knob Creek Tavern. I always said I wanted to be part of a park from the ground up as part of my career. You know, the park has existed, but to be part of the rehabilitation of this building and having a hand in that process and seeing all the changes and seeing the new exhibits come in, I mean, that has been such an amazing journey. I've created memories I know I'll have for the rest of my life. So it's just such an honor and privilege to be part of this.
Had it analyzed. It was good old Mountain Dew. Oh, good old Mountain Dew. I'm in now, refusing our views. I shut up my mouth and fill up my jug with the good old Mountain Dew. Got my brother over, he saw it.
Careful they don't catch their skirts on fire.
Hello, my name is Scott Powell. I'm the facility manager here at Abraham Lincoln Birthplace National Historic Park. I began my career here in 2019, and one of the first projects that I was charged to take was the rehabilitation of the Knob Creek Tavern. A little history about that project. Design was done in 2011 by a previous administration, and Phase 1 was completed in 2015. Phase 1 of that work included installing a wastewater system, building the comfort stations in the rear of the tavern, and reconstructing the front parking lot for easy access to visitors. In 2019, the project was awarded for Phase 2, which included rehabbing a lot of the deteriorated logs, foundation underneath the tavern, updating the HVAC, electrical, and water system in the building, installing a fire suppression and fire alarm system, as well as a security system in the building. Some other items that we did, we rehabbed 100% of the original windows in the building, which included lead abatement. We also did some asbestos abatement into the kitchen. I worked with Stacy Humphreys to get the design completed and the exhibits installed for the tavern. All that was completed in 2021. The total cost from Phase 1 to Phase 2 was $5.7 million for this project, using rec fee 20% dollars. This project was important to me because it was one of the first projects that I was charged with coming on here, and I knew right away how important it was to the local community, to the national community, but also to the staff here at the park. With a design that took over 10 years to complete and get to construction, there was a lot of questions and a lot of wondering if the tavern was going to be what everybody had visioned it to be. So I took great pride in making sure that we followed that design, the vision of the leadership team here. There was some things that had deteriorated further than what we anticipated from the original design, so we had some increase in cost. Majority of the logs that was slated to be replaced, those were replaced, but there were several others that had deteriorated beyond repair, so they had to be replaced 10 years later. Some of the foundation was much worse from 2011 to 2021, so we wanted to make sure we did this project correctly and use the taxpayers' money in the right ways to updating the tavern. Again, I talked a little bit about it being locally significant. Talking with some of the Howard family that the park, that the tavern originally belonged to, they would come down during days of rehab project and talk to me and tell me stories about the tavern, and that just built even more pride in me to make sure that I put this tavern back in its original condition and that it could be enjoyed by many visitors for future generations to come. The project contractor was National Contracting Services. They was a great contractor, worked with me very well through that process, along with the design team, the GWWO. It was a great project team from start to finish, and we had our grand opening last year, October 8th, I believe it was, and we had a great turnout. And then again, just this last week, we had our reopening ceremony, just to let everybody know that, hey, the tavern's still here, and we'd like for as many visitors to come out as possible.
My name is Catherine Bergaw. I am Superintendent of Abraham Lincoln Birthplace National Historical Park. The park consists of 2 units. One is the Sinking Spring Farm, where Lincoln was born. And then the second is the Knob Creek Farm, where he had his first recollections, his first memories. And today we celebrated the first anniversary of the opening of the Knob Creek Tavern Visitor Center. We opened it last year during COVID, and because of COVID, we had just a very small commemorative or celebratory event. So this year we wanted to actually get a chance to do the ribbon cutting, as well as to celebrate the first anniversary of the visitor center. The evolution of the site is, started back in 1928 when the Howard family bought this place to put a roadhouse and to preserve Lincoln's boyhood home. LaRue County has had a culture of preservation here with both the site. And so it really wasn't surprising that the Howard family would decide to save the farm, but also provide the hospitality. So it was Hattie, who was here at the Knob Creek, and her brother was at the Abraham Lincoln Birthplace, because at the time at the Birthplace, the Park Service had yet to acquire the management of that site. So the Howard Howe family really provided the hospitality for both these sites and these farms. It was my understanding, I've only been superintendent here 3 years, but it's my understanding that the process started over 20 years ago to acquire the property when the Howe family was ready to sell and no longer have the business here. And so a small group of community folks envisioned the dream to be able to preserve this place for generations to come. And of course, they worked at the local, state, and national level and raised the funds to buy the farm. And then it was acquired, they donated it to the national park, and the national park started to develop the infrastructure for this place as a national park, including the visitor center. Today, we celebrated the first year of the opening here, and it's been many hands who have made this possible. When I arrived here, the rehabilitation had not begun. The money for the rehabilitation had been acquired, but the actual work had to be done. So that's kind of when I arrived here. And my job was to make sure that the rehabilitation was a credit to the work that came before. We wanted to ensure that we had done an excellent job in making this place come to life again. So that was my task. Fortunately, I had a lot of very talented staff here that ensured that that work was done in a manner in which it needed to be done. Favorite exhibit. One of the things I love is how the exhibits have been designed to reflect the seasons. Those would have been what the Lincoln family formed their life around. When you're on a farm, the seasons govern your life. So I love that they've incorporated that into the exhibits. I love that they've interconnected the seasons in many ways to Lincoln's life, right? All of our lives are very much like the seasons. We're born and that's the spring. And then the summer comes, and so much of what happened in that spring, the foundation of our lives, gets reflected in our summer and our work. And then as we age into the fall, we have a summer that is often governed, at least we hope, and certainly in Lincoln's life, by wisdom. And for Lincoln, I think those were the Civil War years. And his absolute faith that in the American ideas of freedom and equality. I know one of his contemporaries, I love this quote by Charles Sumner, who said after the war was concluded, he said, "Liberty has prevailed, equality is pending." And it's interesting to note that Lincoln, during the second inaugural, chose to have Senator Charles Sumner, who had been beaten in the halls of Congress for his abolitionism by a fellow colleague. He chose to have Charlie Sumner by his side during the second inaugural. I see the fall as that time in Lincoln's life. And the winner, I think, is his legacy that comes after. I think it's wonderful how the exhibits have weaved that story by using those seasons that governed Lincoln's life in his early years. I think they did well in the way that they constructed the exhibits here. So, of course, when I arrived here, I reviewed the exhibits and I was well satisfied with the work that had come before me. And that's part of being part of the National Park Service. We're always standing on the shoulders of others and the work that they have done. And we are always hopeful that those who come after will continue our work. You know, I think that, to me, one of the driving ideas of why this place is so nationally significant is because those early foundations that Lincoln experienced here had a huge impact on what would come later. We recently had a historian, we were doing a presenter series called The Promise of Freedom, and he was actually the attorney who helped with a lot of the land deed work to acquire Knob Creek. And he is a historian, and his synopsis of the importance of Knob Creek is that this is the beginning of the road to emancipation and embodies our great American ideas on which the Founding Fathers established our country, right? But it wasn't perfect, just like we're not perfect. And ideas grow with each succeeding generation as we advance towards, I think, a more perfect understanding of freedom. I think to me, it's one of the most perfect conditions of us as humans. Lincoln was just such a great humanitarian because of his absolute dedication to the idea of freedom. One of my favorite stories of Lincoln is, and this is way after his time, Leo Tolstoy was traveling to some far reaches of the Asian and European continents, and he had been invited by a chieftain to come tell tales of great people. And so he was telling, of course, he's a great storyteller, right? So he's telling stories of Napoleon and Frederick the Great and others. From the sounds of the story, that the chieftain got a little impatient, right? And he's like, but you haven't told us the stories of the greatest of all, the man Lincoln. And, the man from America. And of course, myth, right, is he says something like his voice is like thunder and his deeds are like the rocks, right? But Lincoln was the man whose stories had traveled to some of the remotest, and that's who they wanted to hear about, the Lincoln from America. So Lincoln is not just a great hero of the United States, he's a great hero of the world. And I can tell you on any given day, at the birthplace, people from all over the world come. And how many years later, after Lincoln was born and was a kiddo on this farm, it is, I think, for this community just a great sense of pride that he came from this place.
Can be used to knit, or you can use it to weave. If you have a weaving loom, a little bitty log house like this, there's no room for a weaving loom.
Who's out for that? We had Spirit, of course, and then I'm trying to think who else we brought. I think I brought Luna, which is another great horned owl. Pretty sure Maverick was there. I think Widget, our barred owl, was there.
My name is Tommy Turner. I live here in LaRue County, Kentucky, have my whole life. Well, it's tremendous that the Knob Creek Farm has been added to the National Park Service. This is hallowed ground as far as the Lincoln family is concerned. This property is the land where Lincoln had his first remembrance of Kentucky. And it's such an important place in the importance it played in Lincoln's life in helping form his ideas. Lincoln, while here, saw people traveling on the turnpike in front of the location, and on this turnpike he got to meet a wide variety of individuals. Probably one of the things that stuck in his mind more than anything, though, was the fact that many slaves were marched down this roadway to Bardstown, Kentucky, which was a major slave market. And as a result, I'm sure that left an indelible image in Lincoln's mind about slavery, the perils of slavery, and how it tore families apart. The Lincolns, while they lived at Knob Creek, belonged to a church located near here, and the church was founded on the fact that slavery was wrong. And as a result, I'm sure the preachings that happened at that church that were entered into a young mind played a part in what he became later in life. And so the importance of this property is not only to the Lincoln legacy, the importance of this property is to our entire nation for what Lincoln learned here, what he became as a result of this site, changed America forever. Abraham Lincoln and his family moved here when he was still very young, at just a couple of years old. Really the only experience he had as far as Kentucky and touching Kentucky soil and remember it was at the Knob Creek Farm. When he was a young boy, he had one friend here named Austin Gollaher that he was very close with. Austin lived up the road about a mile, and in fact the cabin that is located here on the Knob Creek farm was built from logs that were taken from Austin Gollaher's home place. And so there is a direct connection to the cabin on this farm to Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln's friend Austin saved him one time from drowning in Knob Creek. Knob Creek, as you can imagine from its name, is formed by water running off the adjacent knobs. And when a large rain happens, that little Knob Creek becomes a raging river. It becomes wild. It becomes a waterway that if you step in it, be ready, because it will take you downstream and you'll be lucky to come out. Abe did that. Abe fell in the water. Austin, through his quick thinking though, was able to save Abe. Just imagine that one small act of kindness by Austin Gollaher saved Abraham Lincoln, but it may have saved America as well. We originally came together in the mid-1990s trying to organize an effort to save the Knob Creek farm. The family that owned Knob Creek at that time had had some interest from some individuals about purchasing the property for commercial type development. And of course we did not want to see that, because we knew this was an important part of the Lincoln legacy. A good friend at that time was former Governor Louis Nunn. And former Governor Nunn talked with me and others. He too wanted to see this property saved. And he organized an effort initially to bring a group of people together to try to save the property. A group was formed, and that group then began the effort of raising funds to save this property. We went to the Howard family, who was the owners of the property, and acquired a one-year option to purchase the property. They, of course, did have a buyer for the property. They agreed to allow us to have that one-year option to try to purchase this land. We went through many different organizations and agencies. Money was accessed through state government, through federal government, through private donations, through heritage and land conservation efforts. Many organizations came together to compile the funds necessary to purchase the property. And in fact, we got the last piece of the pie, the last bit of money needed to save this property on the last day of the option. We signed the option to purchase the property about 6 o'clock that evening, in fact, of the last day that the option was in effect. So it was very close that this property was saved, but it was, and it's now here for all to see, enjoy, and learn from. I'm very pleased that the National Park Service has seen to save the Tavern building that is here. This building was constructed probably in the late 20s, early 30s time frame. It served many purposes through the years. A dance hall. It was at one time a tavern when this community allowed alcohol sales. Through the years, as time changed, as alcohol sales were not permitted anymore, the building changed. I can remember as a youth stopping by here and buying a candy bar, being a stop for that type purpose. Once it became a tourism type stop, then it began to enhance the Lincoln heritage. We were very fearful that the property would fall into commercial development hands and would no longer be the place that it is in terms of telling the Lincoln story. So we're very thrilled that the National Park Service is now in charge. It's now part of the national parks and will be here forever. You know, this land we have here at Knob Creek, it kept reaching to Lincoln throughout his life. He remembers his time here. He remembers his friends here. Kentucky, it just kept coming back to Lincoln. His best friend was from Kentucky. His wife was from Kentucky. His law partner was from Kentucky. Every time that Lincoln needed strength from some place, it seems like Kentucky was always there. One of the reasons why Lincoln said that he was a Kentuckian. He wanted others to know that Kentucky was important in his life. We always want anyone from outside of our region, outside of our state, to know about the Knob Creek farm and to know that this was the place that Lincoln first remembered in Kentucky. He remembered it very well as a child, being here. The experiences he gained here were experiences that later played on the consciousness he drew when he had to have the strength to do such things as the Emancipation Proclamation, as he had to lead our nation through a time of civil war. It was because of those things that were ingrained in his soul while he was here on Knob Creek. They stayed with him throughout his life. Lincoln, in simple terms, is my hero. to think that Lincoln would have the leadership ability and have the strength of character to follow through on his convictions. We don't seem to have that as much today as we used to. Certainly, people like Abraham Lincoln come along once in a century. He was here at the time he needed to be, and because of Knob Creek, he gained the strength and the ability to ensure that those characteristics came out and that our nation as a result survived.
And you know, performing in places like this, roadhouses, taverns, tent shows, and all this nice little 180-year-old vice that I restored and put together so I could do this at historic sites. But it does the job. Of course, we make these too. I have made all these pieces in my journeyman apprenticeship. So you make your own hammers, you make your own vise, you make your own tongs, all your tools.
So our last guest that we have joining us today is Bill Justice. Bill Justice was the superintendent of our park, the Abraham Lincoln Birthplace National Historical Park, and was very instrumental in helping to rehabilitate and restore the Knob Creek Tavern. So he has a lot of really great stories and knowledge to share with you all today. So I hope you enjoy this piece to end our video.
My name is Bill Justice, and from 2011 to 2015, I was the superintendent of Abraham Lincoln Birthplace. When I got here, there were some plans for what to do with the Knob Creek facility here. Now, the Knob Creek building itself, the tavern, was not in good shape. Part of that was just its some of the architectural limitations, especially the second floor really wasn't built to, the supports weren't built to really handle much in the way of people up on the second floor. There were some other issues, particularly with the chinking and some lower level logs and so forth, which are pretty typical of log structures. We had been assessing the condition of the Knob Creek Tavern and of the cabin next door. And the previous superintendent had put together some really basic plans, but not much in the way of detail, and had gotten some money to rehabilitate the tavern, but the money had to be spent more quickly than he could turn around the planning and design piece. It was really supposed to be shovel-ready projects. The next step was to put together some plans on how exactly the tavern would be rehabilitated. Being a historic structure, it requires a certain level of treatment that a typical building would not require. So as the Park Service looks at it, we look at the log walls, we look at the chinking, we look at all of the different elements of the building and what are truly character-defining features. And we work with the State Historic Preservation Office to determine what areas should be worked on and what areas should be retained in their historic appearance. And that took some time. Fortunately, we developed a really good relationship with the State Historic Preservation Office, and were able to work through some issues on that. So when I got to this job, my boss was Gordon Wissinger. Gordon was a chief ranger at several other parks, but he had moved into a chief of staff position in the regional office. And when Gordon hired me, he talked to me about this place. And he told me what the funding situation was, which was there was not a lot of hope for that. And I learned what the previous superintendent had been able to do and hadn't been able to do. But this was one of those projects that I felt needed to move forward. As we managed to get the plans together, we started looking for sources of money to make this work. The regional director of the Southeast region at the time, who was David Vila, moved on to Grand Tetons National Park, and there was a new regional director by the name of Stan Austin who was coming in as the regional director. Now, Stan was coming down from Cuyahoga Valley, what now is Cuyahoga National Park, he was entering the southeast region from Ohio down through Kentucky, and so he took a side trip to Abraham Lincoln Birthplace. And it was supposed to be a quiet thing, but I had connections up at Cuyahoga, so I knew he was coming. And I managed to meet him at the visitor center, and I brought him over here and tried to explain to him how important this place was and how it needed the financial support to become a visitor center. But we had some time to talk about that. I really truly believe that a lot of what happened with the funding of the project as it moved forward came from that conversation with Stan. We moved forward, got the funding based on the planning and design that we'd already done. They broke the funding piece into individual projects, and the only one that I was involved in involved infrastructure. When I say infrastructure, I mean utilities. So we got the money to take the utilities from the road to the foundation, and we got money to bring the water lines and power in to put the visitor center in, and to put parking lot in, and the walkways, and the handicap ramp that goes up to the front porch. And we were able to get everything that's outside the walls of the building properly taken care of. We had a chief of maintenance by the name of Brian Ludwig at the time, and he was an absolute blessing. Brian came to the Park Service from the Air Force, I believe. And when he worked in the Air Force, Brian had been a project manager. So he was managing multi-million-dollar projects for airfields and buildings and those kind of things. And he came to the Park Service, and this project, I guess, was about $250,000 or something like that. So it was expensive by Park Service standards, but it was nothing but from the comparison of what Brian's abilities were. So Brian became a project manager for a short period of time. He had been the chief of maintenance here at the park. And then in 2014, in the winter of 2014, we started all of the utility projects here, and partly to make sure that the contract management was what it should be, and partly just to be able to have somebody on site who could make decisions. Brian relocated from his office over to Knob Creek. Now, put this in perspective. There's no heat anywhere on this property at that point. The only place where there's any electricity was a little kind of a ranger shed sort of a thing. Was essentially a trailer that had been put there when the Park Service first moved in. We managed to find a way to get him internet access, and so for the best part of the winter, his duty station was out here. That was really a good move, because there were some issues that came up with the contractor, some mistakes that were made, some materials that the contractor brought on site that didn't meet the specifications from the contract, and Brian caught all of that. He was able to keep some major mistakes from happening. He paid for it by sitting in cold Kentucky weather out here, but at the same time he was able to do a lot of the work that a chief of maintenance normally gets to do, except for direct supervision of his employees. At the time we had some great maintenance employees that didn't require a lot of supervision. Reggie Price is still with the park now, and he was one of those. That is as far as I managed to get the project. There is a lot of detail in what I'm talking about. Reviews of the design, trying to figure out exactly how we would make sure that the various things met historic preservation standards. The logs that are up there to support the ceiling had been trimmed by the people who built them. And when you take a look at a log, you've got to view it as if it's a 2x4, or a 2x6. So once you slice off the edge and slice off whatever's curved at the top and the bottom, your structural strength is the area in the center of it. Now, because of the trimming and various things that had happened here, there wasn't even a full 2x4 that was holding up the ceiling. That's why the second floor cannot be occupied, and they needed to brace it even more just to fit the HVAC systems up in the second floor. all of those things were part of this this project. It was really fortunate, I think, for the project that I was coming here. Now, that's not because there's anything special about me or anything like that, but I came from Chesapeake and Ohio Canal National Historical Park. Chesapeake and Ohio Canal at the time had a tremendous project management team with a civil engineer and several museum specialists being basically facility managers dealing with historic structures. And so I was exposed to a level of understanding of structural integrity and contract management and those kind of things that somebody in my position would not normally have been. So when I got here, I was able to look at this project more from the perspective of a potential project manager and understanding at least a basic part of the engineering and being able to work with the regional office engineering folks to come up with the plans. And my father is an engineer, so I was living with a what's known as a scale, an engineering scale and an architectural scale, so that I could check the plans and make sure that they were accurate. That was what it took in order to move from an idea to something with structural plans that could be turned into reality. I was able to take the project to the point of getting the utilities and those kind of things and the restroom facility in. And in February of 2015, I was asked by the regional office to go to Vicksburg for an acting position, which turned into a permanent reassignment. And so at that point, my involvement with this project ended. The idea for the exhibits, the exhibit piece of this, the project was broken down into pieces. And one was the utilities, and the second was the project for the structural integrity of the building. Another part was the finishes, and another part was the exhibits themselves. We got funding for the exhibits at about the same time as we were getting promised funding for the structural element, and we're planning on what we would need to do to remove the bottom courses of logs so that they could be replaced, and doing some chinking and things like that. That was in advance of where it normally comes in the hierarchy. It enabled Stacy and I to at least get a vision for what the exhibits should be. There are a couple of elements that were important. One is accessibility. When I talk about accessibility, there's several different elements, but the biggest thing that you'll find as far as accessibility here in these exhibits is tactile elements. Tactile elements work particularly well for people with sight impairments, but they also work quite well for just kids, who learn more with their hands than with their eyes. So I was involved early in the design, and I was able to give Stacy some guidance. And there were a couple of things that I wanted to do with the exhibits, and one of them was to be as low-tech as possible. The problem with high-tech exhibits is they are fine when they work, and when they don't work, they don't do the job that they're supposed to. So something low-tech, like we have in these exhibits, works a lot better and is going to be less costly in the long term. And especially with a low visitation area like this, you're not going to have a whole lot of hand dirt or various things like that that are going to develop over time. I was able to give Stacy that guidance, and she was able to break down the exhibits into the elements that we wanted those exhibits to have. And that was about the time, again, when I headed off to Vicksburg, and Stacy took those ideas and really ran with them. I saw a general concept plan of the exhibits based on what she was putting together, but I didn't see the actual final exhibits until I came here last year for the first opening, when they first opened the exhibits. And they were exactly what we had in mind. I mean, just exactly what we were discussing. The tactile elements of the exhibits came from another project that we pursued over at the Birthplace site. The problem with the Birthplace site is that you've got a large monument or memorial, and then you've got a cabin, and you can't really, without having eyesight, it's really hard to imagine the nature of those structures. The cabin in particular is important because understanding the size of the cabin and its relative size to what a person would be those kind of things is a hard thing to do if you're not able to touch it. And these are legal requirements to provide people with various abilities the opportunity to understand the meanings and significance of the sites that they're visiting. What we started working on over at the Birthplace site was two things. One is a tactile element that was actually part of the exhibits that were there in the visitor center at the Birthplace site. And Stacy had put that together. The other thing is a wayside exhibit, but that wayside exhibit was going to be a pilot for accessibility, an example of the type of thing that could be done. Standard wayside exhibit is a couple of posts with a panel. The panel has one or two, maybe three photographs on it, about 200 words of interpretive text. It's not tactile at all, it's just there. And it's great for somebody who can read and can understand the level of the text and can see the pictures, but it really doesn't help somebody who can't. What this other exhibit did was it had a tactile element, actually maybe two tactile elements, definitely one of the memorial itself. It also had an audio description element that was solar powered. And when I talk about audio description is more than just a reading of the text on the exhibit. It's a description of the exhibit itself. It describes the photographs that are on it. It obviously gives you the text and those kind of things. And to some degree, it may even describe the area that you're looking at while you're looking at the wayside exhibit. This wayside Stacy put together over there met all those standards. And it was just an example of what could be done. That too was a project that got started before I left, and then in February of 2015 I headed off to Vicksburg and Stacy brought that to fruition. So while people are kind of pointing to me about how I accomplished things, I moved the ball forward. I was able to work with the staff that I had and bring some special people like Stacy on who could take that project and use their own skills and our common vision to move them forward and create what we have here today. What Abraham Lincoln means to me. Abraham Lincoln was the right person at the right time for this country. The country had been struggling over the issue of slavery almost since its birth. The Declaration of Independence was argued, about the meanings of it were argued over the issue of slavery. The Constitution, the whole 3/5 compromise, was built on political power based on people who would be counted as a 3/5 of a person for the purpose of representation, but had no vote and had no representation, no actual representation or voice in government. Lincoln wasn't alone in his move to abolish slavery. As a matter of fact, he was just one of many voices, but he happened to be in a position, and an extremely intelligent man, to manage to work through what needed to be worked through to end slavery. One of his great accomplishments, and it happened before he passed, was the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which abolished slavery. I think Lincoln envisioned citizenship and voting of the black male population of the country as well. That whole thing changed what the United States is. It also gave us some of the major problems that we face even today. There's a lot that happens after the Civil War that you sometimes wonder how it would have happened if Lincoln had been involved, and people want to evaluate that. But Lincoln took far as he was able to take it before he was taken from us. Beyond being the right place at the right person at the right moment, Lincoln was a special man in a couple of different ways. He listened. When we talk about Abraham Lincoln and his relationship with slavery, a lot of what Lincoln did was listen to Frederick Douglass and understand with Douglass that some of his earlier views of how slavery could be dealt with were not fair. The people who were here deserved full citizenship, and they didn't deserve to be shipped someplace else. Or when you read the stories and hear the stories about how he would pardon soldiers who had committed offenses that were punishable by death. He was a very merciful man at the same time. Lincoln also understood what the Constitution gave him in terms of political power and power in his role as a president. Lincoln's law experience, his ability to read and understand legal documents, led him to that. People talk about the Emancipation Proclamation as freeing the slaves. Well, the Emancipation Proclamation, even though it says that the enslaved people would be forever free, it was not always certain that that would continue to be the case, because it was a presidential proclamation. Lincoln could not legally eliminate slavery throughout the entire country. That would take a constitutional amendment. What Lincoln could do is, as part of the prosecution of the war, was to free enslaved people in states that were in rebellion and parts of states that were in rebellion. And in theory, only based on the war powers. That's where the letter to Albert Hodges is so valuable. I mentioned that in the talk. The letter to Albert Hodges is a case of Lincoln being able to state what his limitations were of power. The quote that I said was where Lincoln says, "I'm naturally anti-slavery. If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. I cannot remember when I did not so think and feel." But the second part of that is that he doesn't understand that the Constitution allows him to act on those beliefs. And so people have tried to understand Lincoln a great deal, and every historian has their own interpretation of just exactly what Lincoln was. I think Lincoln was a consummate politician. I think Lincoln was a great orator, and I think he's not given as much credit for being a great legal mind as he was. Lincoln is a complicated man to me, and he deserves a great deal of study, which he clearly gets. As an intellect, he's just remarkable. Lincoln was getting that level of intellectual growth. You know, the stories of him having taken part in this small school and going and borrowing books from people and those kind of things. That young Abraham Lincoln was somebody who was hungry for knowledge, and that too was fed by his life here at the Knob Creek Farm. I'm honored to have been a part of this project. Looking at what we have here today and knowing what the building was when I got here, I'm honored to have been part of accomplishing this project.
Well, we hope you have enjoyed this look at our 1-year anniversary and ribbon cutting ceremony and celebration here at the Kentucky Boyhood Home Unit at Knob Creek, home of the beautiful Knob Creek Tavern. That was all part of this video today. I hope that you have enjoyed this look back at members from the Howard family, from members of the community, from park staff. Basically, it really took this whole community to come together to achieve this wonderful achievement of rehabilitating this building. And now it is open so that people from all around the world can learn and share these wonderful stories. The stories that started out, of course, with Native Americans in early times, but also the seeds of freedom. The greatness of Abraham Lincoln were sown and planted here in Kentucky at this spot at Knob Creek. So we hope you have enjoyed this look at today. We thank you for joining us. If you get to Kentucky, come and see us at the Abraham Lincoln Birthplace. We would love to have you here and visit the Knob Creek Tavern. Thank you.